The ninth season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Sunday at 5 p.m.
Once again, from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Hello everyone, I'm Andrea McMaster and thank you for joining us for this edition of Consider This. Many of us see Lake McConaughy as Nebraska's ocean. When full, the lake stretches west for 22 miles. Whitecaps and rock-pounding waves are common, but that hasn't been the case recently. Half of the lake has dried up. How much rain is needed to undo the 7-year drought? Well, we'll have the answers today on Consider This, and we'll also talk about forecasting the weather. Our guest today is Brian Fuchs, the climatologist with the National Drought Mitigation Center that's housed at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And also John Stopkody, with the Science and Operations Officer with the National Weather Service, housed in North Platte. And thank you both for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Glad that you could be here. First off, I want you to talk a little bit about what you do in your jobs. Brian, working at the National Drought Mitigation Center, talk a little bit about what you do there and what the center is for.
What I am is a climatologist, and instead of forecasting the weather, we deal with the weather information after the fact. So as the information comes in on precipitation data from around the country and around the world, actually, we analyze this information, and we also try to help people with drought planning. And that's part of the work of the Drought Mitigation Center. With drought planning, a lot of people don't consider drought as a natural disaster, which it is. The only difference is it's fairly slow to come on, and it's also very slow to go away. A lot of times it's a reactionary type of effect when governments try to deal with drought, that, well, it's already happening, now what should we do? And the mission of the Drought Center is to try to better prepare people to deal with drought before it happens, try to educate them on how planning can be an important part of dealing with droughts, and also mitigation and policy making, where we work with governments in the United States and at the state level as well, and also throughout the world, helping them better prepare and plan for droughts in their respective areas.
Okay, great. And John, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yes, our main objective with the National Weather Service in North Platte is to issue severe weather warnings for 26 counties of western and north central Nebraska, as well as winter weather warnings. And in addition to that, though, we do the public forecasts on a day-to-day basis out to 7 days. And that's both in a text form and also in a graphical form. That's more of an interactive thing where people can go online to really look at their place of western and north central Nebraska, where they can get a really detailed forecast. In addition to that, we also do specific forecasts for the fire weather community and also for aviation forecasts. This year, for the fire weather community, it's been especially important to keep track of these drought conditions, to see how they're leading to problems outside of water mitigation and that sort of thing to the fire community. Sure. So we do a number of varied types of forecasts for western and north central Nebraska.
Sure, we've heard a lot about the grass fires along the interstate especially.
Yes, there's been many.
Well, tell us a little bit. I think you hear people in the community mention, well, is the weatherman going to be right tonight on TV? What is involved in forecasting the weather? And I know that you're at the National Weather Service, that you provide information to TV stations across the area as well.
That's right, and we really do provide all this information to a number of different entities, as I said before, but really, what goes into making a forecast is really far too much to get into. I mean, I could take a half an hour just talking about that, but literally we look at hundreds of maps to put together the public forecast of what a person might see on what might end up on TV or what might show up on the web page and that sort of thing. The amount of data is just almost hard to comprehend how much we have to ingest into our process of making the forecast and then what comes out eventually in the end. So data from all over the world, we get that through our systems at the National Weather Service, and it's our job as the forecasters to really bring that down to where we can focus on western and north central Nebraska to know how the effects around the world are going to really affect those of us in western and north central Nebraska. So there's quite a bit that goes into it, and so it's our job to put all those pieces together to hopefully come out with a good forecast.
Yeah, I know the key is always to be as accurate as possible.
It's a very humbling job.
Well, today we're really wanting to talk mostly about the drought that we have. We're really seeing it in western Nebraska more so than in eastern Nebraska. Tell us a little bit about, there are different ways to measure drought depending on the variable that you're interested in. What are the different ways to measure a drought?
Basically, when we're looking at drought across the United States, we look at it in terms of water supply or hydrological drought, and then we also look at it in an agricultural impact. And in Nebraska, we see both. With an agricultural impact, we're looking at more short-term conditions. Has it not rained for the last 30, 60, 90 days? And if it has rained, has it been below of where it should be, below normal level? And then when we start looking at hydrological drought, we look at several years, the past 3, 4, 5, even up to 7, 8 years. Reservoir levels, stream flows, we're looking at water storage. We also pay a great deal of attention in Nebraska to the Rocky Mountains. We look at their snowpack through the winter and the forecast for how much water is in that snowpack and is going to potentially run off into the river systems that go through the Platte River Valley and through all of the state of Nebraska. And so when we start seeing deficits in the reservoir levels and stream flows are not going as good as they should be, and then we look into the mountains and the snowpack is not where it should be, or it was above normal for a portion of the year but then really dropped off, we start having concerns. And this happens way back in January and February, that we can really get a good idea of what the upcoming year is going to take place in the state of Nebraska.
Okay. Well, lately we've been hearing a lot about global warming, especially on the national level. Is global warming and drought interrelated at all?
I would say that you could probably find some connections between it. It seems like in our driest years, we also are some of the warmest years on record. What is really interesting about that is during the Dust Bowl era, most of the state records as far as record extreme high temperatures for Nebraska did take place. So there is a teleconnection that you can link dry conditions with more warm temperatures. So without studying it completely for the state of Nebraska, I'd say yes, there is a connection. To what degree, it's probably questionable.
Okay. Well, John, we were talking earlier that we've had one of the driest Mays on record. And what can we predict to see in the future? What's the outlook?
Well, the outlook for the short term, for the next week or so, it does look like we're going to get into a little bit of a more active pattern, maybe towards the end of this week, towards maybe the middle part of June. But the problem is we're so far behind. We have a lot to make up. And as is typical in the summer months, the thunderstorm activity a lot of times is kind of hit and miss unless you get a well-organized system. So you can have some good rains, and if you happen to be underneath those good rains, you're going to be well off for a short period of time. But the problem is we really needed to make up some of that precipitation deficit through the spring months when the crops are not going to be using, they're not out of the ground yet, so they're not using that moisture. And that's where we really lacked what we needed to get. As we look out towards the rest of the summer, one of the things I didn't mention of what takes place in our office as well is some local research based on some of the data we have for western and north central Nebraska. And one of the things we've looked at in our office is what happens when you start off the first 5 months below normal, in our case well below normal. What does that tell you for the rest of the year? And what we found is over the last about 120 years or so is that with the exception of 1 year, if you start off the first 5 years below normal, you'll end up the year below normal as well. So it doesn't bode well. You can make up some ground, but as we talked about, there's a lot of ground to be made up is the problem.
It takes a lot of precipitation to make up from that. And we've been talking really about, I guess, the 7-year drought in Nebraska and how much rain is needed. It's going to take more than a couple of years, then it sounds like, to make up for that 7-year drought.
It's going to take a few years of normal precipitation, and we haven't even seen that, much over, especially western Nebraska, over the last 5 years. So we got to see that first. We got to get up to at least normal and then above normal. And that's really going to take a major pattern change for that kind of rainfall to occur.
We'll get to some of the problems that the drought is causing across the state in a minute, but first I wanted you to talk a little bit about, in eastern Nebraska, it might be hard for some folks to relate to drought talk because we have seen some rain here. So how can it be so different in different parts of the state, with western Nebraska dealing with such dry conditions and then eastern Nebraska seeing quite a bit of rain lately?
One of the big differences is the state of Nebraska and where it sits geographically, that from east to west, we range from over 35 inches of rain in the southeast portions of the state up to the northwest portions of the state where there's about 15 to 17 inches of rain. So just geographically speaking, there's about a 20-inch spread in annual precipitation amounts received in the state of Nebraska. And so when we start looking at these deficits of precipitation across the state, in the eastern part of the state, even if we miss out on a little bit, we still don't see the same type of impacts as if they would miss out on the same amount of rain out in western Nebraska. So even though we may be below normal for the past several years in eastern Nebraska at several locations, the impacts aren't there. If you take say Scotts Bluff, Nebraska, that has been below normal for several years, and they're actually at a deficit that is greater than a whole annual year's precipitation, the impacts are great out there, that it takes so much more to recover from that, and they're not used to ever having an abundance of rain to begin with. So when they start dropping off that rainfall, it really is a serious situation out there. And it does impact more people out there. It's very much agriculturally based out in western Nebraska, where irrigation drives that production of crops out there. And so when you start taking water away from the production of corn out in western Nebraska, it's a serious issue.
Mm-hmm. That's one problem related with the drought. Did you want to mention something, John?
Well, I was just going to say, as I came across the state just over the last day, I mean, it's a dramatic difference just in what you're seeing along the interstate. Even if you just look at the medians and the vegetation off to the sides of the interstate, I mean, you can see a dramatic difference from western Nebraska to eastern Nebraska. But you know, because of the agricultural and the differences with irrigation and that sort of thing, and the average rainfall being different, you kind of expect that sort of thing. So, but if you haven't made it out to western Nebraska recently, it's really quite a bit different out there than what it looks like here.
Well, let's talk about some of the specific drought-related problems. We've mentioned the grass fires, and I know, for example, in Omaha, Lincoln, in the past couple of summers, we've had voluntary water restrictions. Now, that's going to seem minor to what the farmers are going through in western Nebraska, but can you tell us what some of the communities are dealing with across the state in relation to the drought?
Well, some of the communities in Nebraska we're really seeing concerns with their wells that supply water to their towns. Some of these systems are older and maybe not as efficient of a system as some of the larger metropolitan areas do have. And when a town is running off maybe one or two wells and the water table starts dropping, those wells are having to work harder to bring less water to the surface to feed the water needs to that area. And so what we have seen over the past couple of years are some of these well levels dropping to the point where towns really had to take into account steep restrictions just to maintain some water service to their people. And parts of the Platte River Valley, with the drop of the water table and the very high agricultural concerns going along in that area, there seems to be a higher concentration of nitrates in the water too. As that water table shrinks, more of those nitrates are concentrated into a smaller pool of water. And I know some communities have also put advisories out that the nitrate levels are fairly high, and to watch the usage of that water, especially with small children and babies. So those are two water supply impacts that we have seen in several places across the state.
And then farmers are being asked to adapt as well to the water shortage. And tell us a little bit about, in some communities, what farmers are being asked to do.
In some communities across the state, Nebraska is broken into natural resource districts, and the local NRDs have put moratoriums on new wells. And so if you have a well out there right now, you're fine. But if it goes bad for you, if you need to place another well out there, for your irrigation systems in many locations in part of south central Nebraska and southwestern Nebraska. You just can't do that anymore. The next concern for farmers is they want to start putting meters on these wells so they can actually regulate the amount of water you're pulling out of the groundwater systems. And it's surprising that we talk about this in Nebraska as we sit over one of the largest aquifers in the world with the Ogallala Aquifer, but in the past 7-8 years, the water table in some parts of the state has dropped significantly, and with a cap on the number of wells that can be brought into an area, it is a concern for many producers that irrigation farming is their livelihood.
So what are they doing? What are some of the ways that they are doing to lessen the impacts of the drought? You mentioned the center pivot irrigation system and why the water is distributed differently and so that they can be able to utilize as much water as possible.
One thing that farmers across the state have been able to do is change their irrigation methods. Traditionally, in much of central Nebraska, flood irrigation was the means of bringing water to their fields where the entire field was flooded with water. And then we went to center pivots, being more efficient, where you're delivering the water as the system moves through the field. And then finally, even within center pivots, they're bringing up a concept of lowering those sprinkler heads right into the crop canopy, so you're distributing that water closer to the ground, there's less evaporation, and it's more efficient for the producer to water in this way. And so we've really seen a lot of changeover in the past few years from the different types of irrigation even going on to more efficient means. And most producers are going to do anything they can to save money and to get more out of the water that they're allocated.
Right. Well, John, you can probably relate to this, especially talk among town being near the area where Lake McConaughey is, this is peak tourist time, and taking in all the recreation that lake can provide for boaters, for families, drawing from Denver, drawing from other areas in the state. And right now, because the lake, half of it is dried up, it really is costing tourism dollars in that area as well.
Yes, I can imagine it would be. And one of the problems that some of the recreationalists will face is the distance you have to go to put your boat in or to get to the water. Having gone out there myself, the spring, it looked a little better than it did the years prior, but it's actually gone down a little bit even since then. So it does cause some problems for those in recreation and wanting to get out and do some boating and that sort of thing, because there's a smaller amount of place for you to get to, and if the same amount of people are going to that small place, then of course the area you have to yourself is a little bit less. So there's a number of different problems that will pose.
Well, I mentioned, Brian, we were talking a little bit about this before, that Lake McConaughey is very unique in the fact that the ownership is not public. It's not a state lake, which a lot of us might think of in drawing state tourism dollars to the area, and that does help. But tell us a little bit about the ownership of the lake and how, in dealing with conserving water in Lake McConaughey, that could become an issue. Well,
the water that's in Lake McConaughey is actually controlled and operated by Central Nebraska Public Power and Irrigation District, which I think they're out in Lexington. And they are the ones that maintain the control of the water in Lake McConaughey. And so even though the state park around the lake or the Fish and Wildlife portion of the state of Nebraska has a fishery out at the lake, they don't actually have much say in how that water is regulated. Yes, they can bring concerns up to Central Nebraska Public Power and Irrigation about how that water is used, or maybe when they would like to see releases of water. But it's really the members of that irrigation district who pay for that water and pay for that service of having water delivered to their fields that really are the ones who control what is happening to that water. And so even though it seems to be a big area for fishing and boating and camping and other recreational activities, that's almost a byproduct of having this reservoir out there that was built and is maintained for irrigation purposes.
Are we ever going to see that lake be like the lake that people knew it a couple of years ago?
I think so. I don't think that it will never recover. I do think that with a favorable weather pattern, one that 10 years ago, 13 years ago, the summer of '93, it just rained continuously all summer long, and we had great floodings along the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. That it wouldn't take too much of a few years of positive rainfall events and positive snowfalls in the Rocky Mountains to really help the situation. And since it is part of an irrigation project, when farmers aren't having to take water out of it, it just leaves it in there. And so, as John mentioned before, we get typical normal rainfalls through that region. It really will lessen the impact on these irrigation reservoirs throughout the entire state, as the need for drawing water out of them won't be there.
Okay, so that's another way to conserve water.
And to help them recover, yes.
Right, okay. John, I want you to talk a little bit about what you do on a daily basis. I think people are just in awe of the weather concept and how we come across of understanding what's going on in the conditions that are going to be in the future. So bring us through your day.
A typical day will start out, well, one of the things we do at our office is, of course, many people have heard of weather balloons and that sort of thing. We actually do release weather balloons twice a day, every day, 365 days a year. So that gives us information about the atmosphere. It gives us temperature information, moisture information, and winds and pressure information throughout the atmosphere, up to as much as 100,000 feet above the ground. So that information is crucial to know how not only the air down around us is changing, but how the air above us is changing, because that really drives how these systems move through across the world. So that information is crucial. So we start the day with that, and that is also done at many hundreds of locations all around the world. And so all that data, as well as surface observations and many other kinds of data, comes into computer systems that allow us to see how the world is evolving really with these systems. And really that's the big part of forecasting, is to know what has happened previous and how that will affect you in the future. One of the things that we deal with when it comes to drought is the lack of moisture near the ground for thunderstorms to develop, or if they do develop, that rain sometimes doesn't ever make it down to the ground, or just a small amount. And that really poses problems for the fire community, because with these storm systems that can be very vigorous and produce lots of lightning, but very little rain to the ground, that can start many grass fires, which we've seen over the past few years. So that's one concern. We also go through, as we go through and make the public forecast, what the folks will hear as far as what's the high temperature tomorrow, what are the rain chances. Right. We also do aviation forecasting, which is specific forecast information for the aviation community, knowing cloud heights, knowing visibility, what the weather is like along a certain route. So we do that as well. We do fire weather forecasting, and on occasion there may be other arenas that we need to provide specific information for. So it really involves lots and lots of data, obviously many different computer systems working together, and also this time of year what we have to worry about is how the weather is acting right now. We can be in the throes of a forecast, and a severe thunderstorm will develop, and so we have to kind of shift our resources to account for that, so that we can get severe weather warnings out to the public, so that they're able to take preventative things. So there's a kind of a plethora of jobs we go through from day to day, and it's not just an 8 to 4 job, it's 24 hours a day, and it's 7 days a week, 365. So
there's always someone staffed there.
There's always, at our office, there's always 2 people there 24 hours a day. So that means in the middle of the night there's somebody there, and that's obviously because the weather doesn't stop.
Right.
And so we have to be there to see how it acts across the state.
Well, this might sound like a kind of a silly question, but I've heard people talk about it before, and the fact that you are looking at all these computer screens and the monitors and all the data and the information. Do you ever look out the window? I mean, does that play in any part?
That's a good question. Yes, we do. Okay. Because in this age of computer systems, where computer systems actually monitor the atmosphere for us on a continuous basis, it could be easy to become complacent and just rely on those computer systems. But we don't do that, because we know that there needs to be human intervention in between these computer systems, not only to make sure that they interact together appropriately, but also to make sure that they're doing the job they're supposed to do. And so to really get a feel for a forecast, a forecaster, meteorologist, really has to go outside and be aware of what's around you. I mean, that's how you can get the ultimate feel for what is really going on in the atmosphere.
Okay. And Brian, I'm going to give you some time too to talk a little bit. We hear the drought monitor a lot. What is that monitoring, and how I don't know if there's an easy answer to that, but how do you come up with the drought monitor?
Well, I'm one of the authors for that product, and it's a weekly product where we work with several different federal agencies. We work with the Weather Service, we work with different parts of USDA and other agencies within NOAA, and we try to compile as much information on drought throughout the entire country as we can, and we try to simplify it into one map showing the different levels of drought. We try to correlate it something similar to a tornado scale, that they have an F0, F1, F5 tornado. Well, we have drought categories from D0 drought all the way up to D4, which is a 1 in 50 year drought event. What we try to do is look at impacts in specific areas around the country. Has it just been dry and they're doing okay that they have water supply, or has it been dry and they're actually seeing concerns because of the dryness, water supply issues, agricultural impacts, tourism impacts? And so we bring that together and we sit down with this map and we draw the contours based on the expertise from around the country and the feedback we receive from them, plus with the same type of information that they look at the Weather Service. We bring in a lot of different climate maps and different indices, and we try to look at all of them at one time. And so the past few weeks, my whole office has been a pile of papers as I've been looking at the information as it comes in. And we make our best judgment as a climatologist, looking at the impacts and looking at the dryness of how to designate a specific area under what levels of drought. And it's a simplified version of it, and it's an effort from several agencies. There's 9 different authors throughout the country that we work together with producing this product. And for the most part, it's been going on for about 7 years now, and it's received a great deal of media attention, and a lot of people in the federal government use it for different purposes within their specific programs.
Okay, that was going to be my next question. Who really utilizes it the most?
The U.S. Department of Ag is really big on the drought monitor. When they look for relief to areas that have experienced drought, they will actually use the drought monitor to see where their cutoffs could possibly be for specific counties suffering from drought impacts.
Okay, well, we have to wrap it up, but I appreciate both of your time. Brian with the National Drought Mitigation Center and John with the National Weather Service. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for this week's Consider This.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 9th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Sunday at 5 p.m.